Good evening.
Check, check. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the regular evening council meeting of December the 13th. We're beginning tonight with 2 public hearings, and I will just call the 2 public hearings to order. These public hearings are being held pursuant to Section 465 of the Local Government Act. All members of the public will be given a reasonable time to be heard or to present written submissions respecting matters contained in the bylaws that are the subject of these hearings. All information, correspondence, petitions, or reports that have been received by noon today concerning the subject bylaws have been circulated to council and are available to the public as part of the meeting package. Staff will provide their report, followed by an opportunity for the applicant to speak. Members of the public who have pre-registered to speak have been added to the speakers list in the order that requests were received. Anyone who has not pre-registered may call into the conference line. This is not accurate now. There will be an opportunity for public comment according to the speakers list, followed by comments from those who have joined since the speakers list was tabulated. Speakers will be asked to state their name and civic address. Please note that all representations, whether written, in person, or electronic, are available for public viewing as part of the public record. Remarks will be limited to 5 minutes per speaker and should include all of the relevant information in your presentation. Further opportunity will be afforded all members of the public to speak a second or third time with new information only, once all persons have had an opportunity to speak. Council may ask questions of staff and public, but once the public hearings are over, no new information can be received. Council debate on the bylaws will take place during the regular council meeting following the conclusion of the public hearings. At that time, any questions of staff will be for clarification purposes only. The corporate officer will now provide information on the notice of these public hearings.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The notice of the public hearings was given by posting on the notice board at Municipal Hall and on the district's website and advertising in the Summerland Review issues of December 2nd and December 9th, 2021. In addition, for public hearing number 10907 Prairie Valley Road, for public hearing number 1, and mailing 32 notices to owners and occupiers of surrounding properties on November 25th, 2021. An updated notice was also remailed to these 32 owners and occupiers on November 29th, 2021 to clarify the public hearing was for in-person attendance only and that no electronic participation was available. For public hearing number 2, 160 notices were mailed to owners and occupiers of surrounding properties on November 25th, 2021. An updated notice was also remailed to these 160 owners and occupiers on October 29th clarified the public hearing was for in-person attendance only and that no electronic participation was available.
Thank you, Corporate Officer. We'll now open public hearing number 3.1 on our agenda, zoning bylaw amendment, bylaw number 2021-044 for 10907 Prairie Valley Road, Z21-001. Joanne?
It's on now. Is everybody awake? Okay, so the purpose of zoning amendment bylaw number 2021-044 is to change the zoning designation of the subject property at 10907 Prairie Valley Road from residential medium lot RSD1 to residential duplex housing RDH. The property is approximately 814 square meters and currently contains a single detached dwelling. And the property fronts Prairie Valley Road and is currently accessed by a single driveway. The subject property is currently designated as low-density residential in the official community plan. And the low-density residential designation has a typical density range of 4 to 22 units per hectare. And it is meant to accommodate single detached housing and duplex housing. And it is the only residential designation in the OCP that contemplates standalone duplexes. So within the policies for residential development, there's encouragement to ensure that there's a range of housing types and choice that is provided to meet market demands and to ensure that there are more affordable options that increase density while still providing a livable design. Policies also are to ensure that development is located where it can be efficiently serviced, like in an area where the district services are already provided along Prairie Valley Road. So this property is within the urban growth area identified in the OCP as a place for infill and intensification. The urban growth area is essentially where we want to be directing growth so that densification can occur to support sufficient servicing and create a complete community where housing has pedestrian connections to amenities and services. It also is a place to encourage diverse housing opportunities within the area. And in this case, the development is located within walking distance of downtown, a school, and there's servicing already provided. So as you can see, most of the surrounding area is RSD1, which is the yellow shown on the map there, with the exception of a few higher density parcels shown in brown. And there's also Giants Head School, shown in teal, and a care home facility also shown in teal. So the proposed zone would introduce a duplex use in a primarily single family area. In comparison, comparing the two zones, I have highlighted the use and the regulation differences between the two in bold. So we have the existing zoning on the left and the proposed zoning on the right. As you can see, a duplex use is introduced under this bylaw. There are different minimums for subdivision, which are also highlighted there. And a slight change in the maximum floor area ratio going from 0.45 to 0.5. In terms of other regulations such as setbacks, maximum heights, there's actually no change between those two zones. They're fairly similar in terms of what built form can be expected between the two. So the applicant has provided a conceptual plan, which I will share in a moment. And this table just shows a comparison between the proposed zoning and the conceptual plans that have been provided. So just to highlight that the subdivision minimum area for the zone, the existing lot size is slightly under what would be required for subdividing a duplex. So a duplex can still go on that parcel under the zoning, but is slightly undersized to be subdivided. And I also note on the plan that the maximum height for an accessory building is 4.5 meters or 1 story under the RDH zone. The applicant under a separate application is looking to increase that to allow for 2 stories for an accessory building at the rear of the property. So the conceptual plans show a duplex building facing Prairie Valley Road with 1 driveway per unit and 1 parking stall on the front of each of those units. And there's also parking in the rear, so a total of 3 parking stalls per unit being provided. So the overall concept plan demonstrates simply the feasibility of constructing a duplex on the parcel. And there are going to potentially be adjustments made to either the design or seeking variances in the future for the accessory building, for example, in order to accommodate it. But this is essentially a conceptual plan at this point to demonstrate how a side-by-side duplex might look on that property. And as I said in the back, there's 2 parking stalls in the rear. 1 is within the garage building, and then 1 is to the side. So under these conceptual plans, there's 2 units total for a side-by-side duplex. It's facing Prairie Valley Road, and it's 2 stories plus an unfinished basement below. And then you can see at the rear, there's an additional building, again, conceptually at 2 stories, which would require further variance should this zoning move forward. And just for your reference, that is the conceptual rendering for the building facing Prairie Valley Road, and that would be the rear of the building facing the internal part of the lot. So, and this is again the conceptual drawings for an accessory building at the rear. And I just want to emphasize at this point that the applicant has provided these conceptual plans, but they're not tied to them in terms of what the zoning is. So the actual design and layout can change. So they're meant for demonstration purposes to show the feasibility of placing a duplex on the lot and the intentions of what the applicant actually wants to build in the future. So if this zoning bylaw was to go forward, the duplex essentially would be limited to the provisions that are in the RDH zone in terms of setbacks, lot coverage, and other regulations. So in summary, the purpose of this amendment is to change the zoning designation from RSD1 to RDH, and this would allow for a duplex building or a single detached dwelling to be built on the property. And to be clear, the maximum number of units that would be allowed under the zoning amendment bylaw would be 2. So it's for a duplex with 2 units, and the proposed zone does not include carriage houses or secondary suites or any other units on the property. That concludes my presentation. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Joanne. I'll now go back to our corporate officer, Kendra Kinsley, to bring us up to date on correspondence that has been received.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. One written submission was received and no support of the proposal. So one written submission was received in non-support of the proposed amendment.
Thank you. There's a little bit of delay before the green light goes on. Okay, so now we're into the public hearing stage. Thank you for that presentation again, Joanne. And Richard Simpson, the proponent, has the opportunity to speak first.
Hi there, my name is Richard Simpson, and I am proposing this duplex rezoning for this property. It is all conceptual drawings. There is no solid design of this. This was done just to show what could be done on the property, like the previous speaker said. And I would love to have some questions. If you guys wanted to ask me any questions, so I can answer any of the concerns that you may have. Each duplex is approximately 2,500 square feet. The space above the garage is we're literally hoping that those would be home offices. They are not meant for living or people living there at all. They were for a home business or home-based office from the people that own each side of the duplex. It is all close to downtown, it's close to schools. It is something that Summerland needs. I personally know this because I've built 12 homes in Summerland in the last 5 years. And I do know what the demand is in Summerland, and it is to find rentable areas, rentable housing. Densification is a big thing, I think, for Summerland in certain areas where it allows it, where it's close to amenities. I think it would be a positive addition to the neighborhood in that area as well. I really do. It's, I've been, my kids went to school there. I've been here for 15 years, so I've seen that street for a long time, and I've always thought that it could be something more. That's all I have.
Thank you, Richard. We'll give the opportunity for the public to make comments as well. And then if there are questions of council for you, then we'll ask you to come back up to the podium.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the first person I have on the speakers list is Mr. Graham Walker. Please come forward. State your name and your civic address, please.
My name is Graham Walker, and I live at 10911 Prairie Valley Road. Okay, in reading the material provided in advance, I can see the case for inviting public comment tonight. On one hand, the official community plan would like to increase population density in the area, but there are unaddressed concerns in the proposed development. I read the notes from the advisory board and can concur with their comments. However, I'd like to point out some additional concerns that may have been missed. 10907 is in proximity to an elementary school, just 9 doors down. Duplexes are usually an affordable starter home for young families, retirees wishing to downsize. They can find duplexes an affordable alternative to a condo complex. However, from my perspective, the developer's plan is to maximize the number of rental units and make it an attractive investment for a rental property owner. A young family definitely could not afford what is proposed. Another concern, the high water table and the effects of climate change that we have. We should seriously consider the effects of climate change on building code. In other parts of BC, slides have damaged a lot of property and infrastructure. Dale Meadows Fields was under water in the spring of 2019. We can't predict the future, but full basements in this area may be a concern. Another one is Prairie Valley Road has potential to give first impressions to tourists on their way to the KBR Railway, Summergate Winery, and Test of Humanity, etc. An oversized property mixed in with bungalows make you think that the building permit unit can be duped. Another one is fit within the neighborhood. Tall, oversized buildings built as close to the property line as possible, peering down into the adjacent yards, look out of place in a neighborhood of bungalows. I'm sure you've heard this before. My property is immediately to the west of 10907. Personally, I will lose the view of Giant's Head Mountain, and my morning coffee in the sun will have to wait until 10 a.m. We purchased our property with morning sunshine in mind. There are numerous other issues which are hinted at in the Advisory Planning Commission's notes that will create problems for us as well. I would like to highlight one concern that the Advisory Planning Commission had in regards to the frequency of new builds requesting variances. Without knowing the details, it can infer that if the frequency is increasing, the success rate of getting a variance approved is increasing as well. It is worrisome to me that the applicant did not seem to take the Advisory Planning Commission seriously when asked to address the basement suites that make it look like a fourplex. The applicant merely spent a minute with the CAD software and erased the basement furnishings and typed in unfinished basement on top. The private access to the basement suites is still there, and everything to quickly suite the basement is present. It is not hard to imagine auxiliary buildings becoming rental units as well. If the proposal goes ahead, we feel that it will quickly turn into a sixplex and all the yard space will be full of vehicles. Just have a look at the property to the east of this one, 10903 Prairie Valley Road. It has a 10-car gravel parking lot in the front. There's no trees or hedges or anything there. Having two adjacent properties where the front yards are full of vehicles for all to see on Prairie Valley Road would not look good. I could go on pointing out issues with the proposed development, but it is your wish that I address the issue of rezoning the land to residential duplex housing and not complain about the development. I only have 5 minutes. I would like to circle back to the Advisory and Planning Committee's concern about the increased requests for variance. If the building permit people are not rigid with their codes, then I would definitely not be in favor of the zone change. An oversized duplex would be much more undesirable than an oversized single-family property. Are we that desperate to consider Vancouver-style densities? With Kelowna and Penticton nearby, Summerland will always be more suburban and rural. Personally, I would support rezoning to duplex if the applicant was keen on building modest, affordable starter homes for young families that are a closer fit to the neighborhood. Since the applicant has demonstrated no intent for this, I have no choice but to oppose this proposal. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Now, do you have one more applicant registered to speak before the public? Okay, thank you. Mr. Walker, did you pick up your mask as you left?
Yes.
Good, perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
The next person we have on the speakers list is Glenn Monahan, followed by Carolyn Monahan.
Hello, my name is Glenn Monahan. I live at 10906 Pryor Place, which is directly behind the proposed development or resident that is being proposed. We obviously have a few concerns that it obviously backs right onto our property, the impact to our property value. Hypothetically, if we decided to sell to a potential buyer, if this place was to go through as proposed, as the people came through our place, they wouldn't notice the pool in the backyard, the landscaping we've done, fences, archways, plants, trees. The first thing they're going to see is this big, huge duplex with these 2 huge 2-story garages, potentially. That would be a big red flag for anybody wanting to buy our place. I guess really, why is the developer able to maximize the dollars of a piece of property at the expense of our property? Doesn't seem very fair. Surrounding properties are complemented by other properties of like sizes and designs. When someone installs, beautiful fence or landscapes or property, paints the house, that complements the neighborhood, complements the curb appeal and the surrounding properties. But this doesn't complement what's presently there whatsoever. Talking of affordability, one would imagine that building a house or a duplex for affordability towards young families. But I can't see how young families can afford to buy that in one of those places. Not to mention there's no area for sandboxes or a play area for kids or a trampoline. So it kind of defeats the purpose in my mind. The reason we moved and chose Summerland in particular was to get away from this type of densification and these types of buildings. I would really hate to see Summerland turn into the lower mainland. It's very unsightly. I'm sure most people have been there, seen it. I don't think anybody would want that built beside their place or behind their place. It just almost seems like it's a, do as I do, don't do as I do, but do as I say. And I can't stand behind that. I don't think it's the right thing for that area. The existing years, the property values, and just the overall appeal of that area. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Monahan. Please come forward, Carol.
Thank you. Obviously shared the sentiments of my husband, who too I do live behind the house in question. My issue, it really is going to echo that of the speaker that came just before my husband and I, and it's once the duplex is there, my concern is with the basement suites, and it's also with the auxiliary suites above the garage turning into some sort of housing. If you ask anyone, I'm the biggest proponent for more affordability in Summerland and more places for people to rent, but I just don't know that we need to do it all on one. Again, my concern is going to be with the variances and things being pushed through, and suddenly instead of 2 families living behind me, I maybe have 4 to 6. Where all those cars are going to park, where navigating Prairie Valley Road on garbage day is challenging as it is in fair weather with the carts on being put to the road. In inclement weather, as we've had with snow and all of that, I can just imagine how many more challenges there will be to carts on the road. And then also my final concern is with the precedent that is being set. I could very well see if this goes ahead, then it could go ahead on the properties to the east, all the way down to Giant's Head. And suddenly it's like all of the people are living behind and beside apartment buildings, which is really where we could get to if we have auxiliary buildings that also have suites. I'm not opposed to the duplex itself. Again, it's the auxiliary building and the potential for finished basements that that do really concern me, and the number of people and cars on the property. And that's that. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Carolyn. Kendra, could I ask you to introduce the next speaker on your list?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we have Jeff Gagnon as an applicant registered to speak.
Hello, thank you. My name is Jeff Garno, and I am the co-owner of ODC, Open Up Development Consultants, and we are the agents for the proposed project on 10907 Prairie Valley Road. We're here proposing a rezoning from the current RSD1 zoning to residential duplex housing, RDH. If the rezone is approved, we will then be proposing a new duplex building with a detached garage and currently with a office space above. Although the duplex plans are conceptual, we have provided details that outline the floor plans and elevations of both structures. Each duplex will have approximately 2,500 square feet of living space, with the main floor in the kitchen, dining, and living room, and access to the rear yard. The top floor will have 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, a den, which could be a 3rd bedroom, and a sitting area. And currently, we're showing the lower floor as unfinished space with the mechanical room. With the office space over the garage, it was proposed when COVID first hit, and the first wave of work from home was being introduced to BC. We felt the concept of providing a space to work from home could be valuable to some folks. This location is close to schools, the downtown core, and amenities, and overall, we feel the duplex will be positive addition to the neighborhood and will add some much needed dwelling units to the community. Again, this is a conceptual plan. As far as we understand, the current plan would have possibly 2 variances, which would be the height of the secondary accessory dwelling or structure, and the width of the driveways. The rest of the duplex itself does not hold any additional suites, although we understand the concern for the lower floor. The height of the building is well underneath the maximum height. I believe it's at 8 meters, or the max height is 9 or 9.5.
Thank you. And do we have anyone else on the speakers list? No. Okay, thank you. Okay, council, questions of the applicant or anything that came forward from the public? Councillor Holmes.
Yes, just a question of clarification from staff, if I may, and then a question for the applicant. So just clarification that what we're deciding here is just the rezoning and any variances will come to us at another time. Is that correct? So a question to the applicant, if I may, is your application dependent on the variances being passed at a later time?
Absolutely not.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Carlson.
Thank you. Question for staff. What process does the district have in place to ensure that secondary suites and extra carriage houses aren't actually being occupied far down the road when something like this does get built?
Hello, thanks for the question. In terms of projections for looking at whether additional spaces could be converted to dwelling units down the road, we confirm that through the building permit process, primarily is our tool. So when this duplex is actually constructed, we at that time ensure that the zoning at the time of the council, as well as any variances that were required for the building, and the number of dwelling units that were being proposed with that floor plan. if things change over time, sometimes like those things do happen, then our bylaw enforcement team can follow up directly with the landowner and try to actively deal with any enforcement issues of present performance. Yeah, do something like that.
Anyone else on council have questions of either the applicant or the public to bring forward? Okay, I will ask if there's anybody else that would like to speak. And I'll ask that's for the second time. Anybody else here tonight that would like to speak on public hearing number 1, please come forward.
Good evening. My name is Mike Neal, and I'm the owner of the Economic Consultants. And I'd just like to add that for a project like this in this area, a lot of the homes there are obviously, smaller, 1.5 stories kind of deal, but this kind of densification will happen eventually. And I think it will be a positive thing. And the idea of it being like the Vancouver base, these apartment buildings, those are 6-story structures, and those are much larger structures than a 2-story, 3-story. So.
And now for the third and final time, is there anyone else that would like to speak to public hearing number 1?
Shelley Davis, and I just want to add that again, 2,500 square feet. If you're reading that is definitely not an affordable amount that a young family can afford to rent or to own. So I think that this I think it's wonderful to build duplexes, but if you're going to make them affordable, why do you need a huge basement where the water table is questionable? Why not build one level duplexes in the right size, have green space for the family, and make it a proper dwelling that they can afford and a family can really enjoy? And not build it to be 2 stories. Where everyone's going to be in every yard adjacent to this is going to be looking at that. And if it was your home, would you want that? Thank you.
Would anybody else like to speak to public hearing number 1? Council, any more questions? I just have one of the applicants, so I don't know. Richard, you'd like to come forward again? My question is, I guess, similar to what Councilor Holmes asked, and it's not necessarily to do with variances, but given what we heard about the water table, and we know that it's high in that area.
Yeah.
Would there be any consideration to not including a basement?
That consideration is, you see, I built 3 homes on the lake. We did one with 6.5-foot crawl space right on the lake. It's a process of building that I'm sure not all of you are aware of how to do, but there is processes to build basements in high water table. The house in question at 1907 has a basement in it. There is someone actually living in that basement. We bought the house and there was people living in the upstairs and people living in the downstairs. And I'll be honest with you, the conditions that they're being forced to live in are something that myself and builders and developers can kind of fix in this in Summerland. There's some pretty derelict homes that people are being forced to rent because there's nowhere else to rent. And they're getting charged $1,500–1,600 a month for rent on these derelict homes, and people are paying it, and landlords aren't fixing anything because. Anyways, that's a different story, but no, when it comes down to building a basement in high water table, there's just a process of building. There's water membranes that you use on the outside of your foundation. Some pumps for emergency situations are installed, and that is, I have no concerns of a full height basement in that area, considering there is an 8-foot basement in that house right now. With no water table mitigations whatsoever. It was probably built in the 40s.
Good, thank you for that assurance. Okay, so I am going to declare this public hearing closed then, and we'll move on to public hearing number 2. And Joanne is speaking to that one as well. Zoning bylaw amendment, bylaw number 2021-033, Z21-00.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the purpose of zoning amendment bylaw number 2021-033 is to rezone the water shown on the map there, abutting the Lakeshore Racket Center from WZ3, which is an intensive water use zone, to WZ2, which is a recreational water use zone 2. So this zoning amendment contemplates the merits of having no marina or any other boat access or docking facilities at this location. So the merits of a particular marina proposal or design is not the subject of this particular zoning amendment bylaw, as the bylaw seeks to remove the zoning permissions to allow for such a use to occur in this location. So in Lower Town itself, the WZ3 zone currently extends from Peach Orchard Park to the neighborhood park just south of Summerland Waterfront Resort, shown in the kind of bluish purple color. And it abuts 5 non-district parcels, including the Lakeshore Racket Center, the Oasis Development, the Trout Hatchery, the Yacht Club, and Summerland Waterfront Resort. It also fronts several district parks, including Rotary Reach, which is directly to the north. So the proposed WZ2 zone would be specific to the subject area. And it essentially, if the bylaw was adopted, it would decrease the amount of uses that would be permitted in that particular area. So the content of the draft amended bylaw, just to give a comparison of changing from the WZ3 to the WZ2 zone. So the existing zone being on the left and the proposed zone on the right. The items in bold are the uses that would be removed from being allowed in that subject area. So that includes marinas, boat launches, boat lifts, docks, fish hatcheries, foreshore public access, marina equipment rentals, temporary moorage, water feature installations. And it would allow for boating, recreational water activities, uses permitted by provincial crown lands and public utilities. So there wouldn't be any structures that would be in that area. So just as a quick refresher in terms of timeline of how we got to this public hearing. So this is a district-led zoning amendment bylaw. So we started with a notice of motion at the August 9th last meeting. And this was initially to change the zoning from WZ3 to WZ1 in response to a marina proposal that would be. waterfront development. And then that did go to the advisory planning commission, that reviewed the draft and supported that it proceed to public hearing. Council at the September 27th council meeting looked to draft a bylaw for a site-specific WZ3 zone implementing criteria in consultation with the proponent. And then at the October 12th council meeting, council reconsidered that previous motion and defeated the resolution. And then council then directed staff to prepare the zoning and the bylaw that is the subject of this public hearing today, which is limited to rezoning the water area immediately adjacent to the Lakeshore Racket Center for to go to WZ2. And this was then given first and second reading. We have received external comments from agencies. So the Protected Indian Band and Ministry of Forest Lands, Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development have provided correspondence, which is available in the council package. PIB is supportive of the rezoning to the WZ2 and provided conditional approval as noted on the slide here. So that the proposed activity does not have lasting effects on the environment, that it doesn't adversely impact work resources, culture, and so on, and that they continue to be meaningfully engaged throughout the process. In terms of other comments, the Ministry of Forest is also supportive of the amendment and initiatives of local government in general to manage the foreshore development. And they did also note that if there was any referral for a marina application, that would be sent through the referral process to the district for any tenure application. So in reviewing the applicable policies in the OCP, the Lower Town area does have some specific policies to facilitate additional public boat docking facilities along the waterfront and initiatives of increasing public boat access opportunities. And the WZ3 zone is the only water use zone that would allow for such a facilities. So no public access docking facilities or public road access opportunities are allowed within the proposed WZ2 zone. In the OCP, there's also support for foreshore leases for the use of docks or wharfs, but with the qualifier that the natural function and public access of the foreshore is maintained. It is also noted that there is a future development area in Low Town, and the subject area is just north of that identified area. So the supportive policies for docking and mooring opportunities for public boats, that area is identified as shown in the blue, and the subject area is outside of that future development. The subject area is also outside of the Lower Town development permit area, which is shown in purple. So that in the design guidelines for Lower Town, they do encourage development of additional public and private facilities, including additional public docking and mooring facilities in conjunction with development. But this specific area under the rezoning is outside of that area. So those supportive design guideline policies do not apply to this area. Right? So in summary, the intent of the zoning amendment bylaw is to change the zoning of the portion of the lake shown here that is immediately adjacent to the Lakeshore Racket Center from the WZ3 zone, which is a more permissive use zone, to a WZ2 zone, which is a more limited recreational water use zone. Essentially, this bylaw removes a marina or any other docking facility as a permitted use within that area. And just to provide some clarity, being in favor of this amendment bylaw is to be in favor of the marina not being out there. And conversely, if you are opposed to this amendment, that is to be in favor of the potential for a marina or other docking facilities at this location. That concludes my presentation. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Joanne. Kendra, do we have correspondence to bring up? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. 7 written submissions were received, 5 in support and 2 posing questions about the amendments, and either in support or non-support, just asking questions.
Thank you very much. So because this was something that was brought forward by council, we don't have a proponent or an applicant to speak first, so I'd like to invite Colleen Power to the podium, please.
My name is Colleen Power. Can you hear me? I'm the current president of the Summerland Recreation Society. We're commonly referred to as the Lakeshore Racket Center. We are situated at 13607 Lakeshore Drive. As mentioned, is the property directly in front of the Lakeshore area in question at this public hearing. We are the upland owner of 13 small lots along Lakeshore Drive, and the rest of the property is leased from the provincial government. We've been there for the past 45 years, with 23 more years left on our current lease, which requires the property be used as a public recreation facility. Our leased and owned properties are open for public use year-round and are maintained solely by volunteers of the center with a little help from the district now and then with our parking lot. Dog walkers gather at our property in large numbers. Our parking lot is used for overflow at Rotary Beach. Members of the public regularly use the area for launching their kayaks, paddleboards, spot for their dogs to swim. We hosted 24 youth at a tennis camp this summer, and it was during the heat wave, and those kids were jumping in the water in front of the club in between classes. The lakeshore in front of our property is well used in many, many ways. It's likely that most people in town don't even realize that that the property they enjoy is actually leased and owned and maintained by our society. Specifically, in regards to the change in zoning, we surveyed our members in November. We provided background information as was available on the district website and from other sources. We asked our members if they supported a change in zoning in front of our property from the current WZ3 to WZ2, which does not permit marina. A total of 42 responses were received, representing 54 members. We have many members which are family households. One response, all but one response, was in favor of the change in zoning. And that one response that wasn't in favor, we're not sure they understood the question given the comments. But in fairness to the process, one was against. Comments and concerns we received in no particular order are as follows. And also when you're seeing the answers, think of at least 55 people applying. Our members expressed concern for the Rocky Mountain Ridge mussel in the area. They expressed concern regarding general precedent for allowing encroachment of adjacent properties to develop in front of upland owners' properties. Concern for safety of the public using the area, including those using Rotary Beach, which is right beside us. canoers, kayakers, stand-up paddlers, distance swimmers come across our area. We already have jet ski issues due to our close proximity to the yacht club. They gas up, and then instead of going out the way boaters are directed to go out, they just sneak along right in front of our property. And it can be a bit frightening for anyone who has decided to swim. An increase in power boats will make this even worse. People mentioned parking in the Lower Town area. And that is an issue and needs to be a more serious issue. The area has beautiful path and boardwalk, quiet sitting areas along the way. More congestion would impact that marine area. People expressed concern that if the subject shoreline remains WZ3, future marina in the area, if allowed, would inevitably push to expand their design to include a breakwater. This would only heighten our concerns over environmental, safety, community use, economic, and aesthetic factors as described already. Because we were mandated from our founding almost 50 years ago to use the property as a public recreation facility, we feel the allowability of a marina at that location runs counter to our community mandate and the long-term interests of our members and our district to enjoy that space. The Lakeshore Racket Center overwhelmingly supports the change in zoning from WZ3 to WZ2. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. The next person on the speakers list is Steve Friesen.
I thought I shut it off, but clearly not.
Hello.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for this opportunity to speak. I am Steve Friesen. I'm here representing Sunny Holdings, who is the upland owner the landowner adjacent to the Lakeshore Racket project. From a neighboring development perspective, this rezone would be extremely restrictive, as we already have the Summerland Yacht Club taking up over half of our frontage. And so from our interpretation of the community plan, this would be contrary to put this in. We don't see how this is favorable now and certainly would deter any future development potential on that upland property. Should the current leaser change, obviously that's not going to happen for a couple decades, but we just would encourage you to keep that WZ3 zone as it stands. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill Everett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. I don't have a lot more to add to what Colleen already noted. I should note that my property is right across from the Lakeshore Racket spot, so at 13818 Lakeshore Drive South. So I'd be facing the marina if it was to be installed. My fundamental issue is that the marina intends to be built to the left of their property and not in front of their property. And it just doesn't seem like that would be the right place to put it. There are some considerations that I would have with the design we had in place for the marina, but essentially that's not what we're talking about here today. So I just want to say that I am in favor for making the change to zoning of MZ2. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Council, do you have any questions of staff? Any questions of anyone that's spoken tonight? Council Carlson.
I do have a quick question of staff. I note that in the report that we received when we originally talked about this and there was first reading given, it was noted that this change didn't match the OCP, but I'm just wondering if you can clarify, because my understanding is that the area that's proposed to change to WZ2 is outside of the actual boundary area for intensification or for future development in Lower Town. So I'm wondering if you can just clarify or refresh, because I think it came up last time, how this, in your view, doesn't actually meet the OCP.
Thank you. So there are some elements with the change of the subject area that are no longer applicable and essentially no longer conflict with the OCP, but there is a general thrust of policies in the official community plan in terms of promoting additional boating access to the waterfront in Lower Town. So it's something that was noted by staff as being something that we felt that was in conflict with the proposed amendment, and that we'll note that that is something that in council discussion, council had a different interpretation as to what was the intent of the OCP and deemed it to be consistent.
Any other questions? Okay, I will ask for the second time now if there's anyone else here that would like to speak to public hearing number 2. And the third and final time, anyone here that would like to speak to changing from WZ3 to WZ2 in front of the Lakeshore Marina or Lakeshore Rackets? All right, so I'll declare this public hearing closed. Okay, and we call the regular council meeting to order. For Monday, December the 13th. This meeting is being recorded live and is streaming. All representations to council, written or verbal, will form part of the public record and be available to the public for viewing electronically or as a written record. Members of the public may access the meeting or participate in the following ways. Attend the council meeting in person. If you wish to do so in person, you can register in advance the meeting by contacting the public officer. Obviously, everybody has done that, and you're sitting in the seats that are there. Watch the meeting live or record it. If you want to do so, you can view this recording again, if you like, at youtube.com, District of Summerland. For those who have not registered in advance but wish to speak during the public comment opportunities, you may be given the opportunity if the time permits. After I've provided everyone who is pre-registered with an opportunity to comment, the floor will be open to those in attendance at the council meeting. Corporate officer, are there any late items to introduce? No. Thank you. So council, I'll ask you to approve the agenda that's before us. Thank you, Councillor Holmes and Councillor Van Elfen. All in favor? And then on to 4.1, adoption of the minutes for the November 22nd, 2021 regular evening council meeting. Councillor Van Elfen and Holmes, all in favor? Thank you. Moving right on to the bylaws that were subject of the public hearings tonight, beginning with 5.1, zoning bylaw amendment, bylaw number 2021-004, 10907 Prairie Valley Road. Does council have any questions for clarification to ask of staff? All right, so could I have someone bring forward, thank you, Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor. That zoning bylaw amendment 10907 Prairie Valley Road, bylaw number 2021-044 be read a third time and adopted.
Thank you. Councillor Barco seconding. Any further discussion on this? Councillor Holmes and then Councillor Van Elfen.
Yeah, I would just like to note that it seems that any opposition there is to this development is to the variances, not to the zoning itself. And so I certainly support the rezoning and will deal with the variances in due course.
Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I think it was answered very well by our director of planning. The concerns about extra occupants in the upstairs of the garage or in the basement of the duplex units. The neighbors have the ability to notify bylaw if that's the case. And it's been identified by the builder that that's not their intention, but if it ever did happen, there is an avenue for the public. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Van Elfen. Any further discussion? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? And none are opposed, so that carries unanimously. On to the second public hearing from tonight, zoning bylaw amendment, bylaw number 2021-033. Again, I'll ask council if you have any questions or clarification for staff. If not, could I have someone bring forward the motion, please? Councillor Holmes.
That zoning bylaw amendment, bylaw number 2021-033 be read a third time and adopted.
Thank you. Councillor Barco, you are seconding that. Any further discussion? Councillor Holmes.
Yeah, I just like to say that I see this bringing the water zoning in line with the adjacent land zoning, in which case, in which respect I see it, helping to align with a lot of aspects of the OCP, and I think the community really values that piece of property. Looking at the lake, along the lakeshore there, and I think it's worth preserving as it is. Thank you.
Okay, if there is no other discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? That carries unanimously as well. Thank you, Joanne and Grant, for those. Moving on now to the mayor's report. It's been 3 weeks since we had a meeting, so This is a bit of a longer report. I apologize in advance. It's been busy. Council continued with the 2022 budget process at a committee of the whole meeting November the 23rd. Following a discussion on the proposed utility operational and capital budgets for 2022, we recommended proposed utility rate increases for that year. An open house on the proposed rates was held December the 2nd, and at our council meeting this afternoon, we had first, second, and third readings for the proposed utility rates amendment bylaw. A portion of the increase for each utility is going into a reserve fund for future capital projects. Should the proposed rate increases be adopted this Friday, they will go into effect on January 1st, 2022. And a reminder that budget meetings are open to the public. The following day, on behalf of the Southern Interior Local Government Association, SILGA, I hosted the second in a series of 3 speakers in SILGA's fall speakers series. Dan George of the Wet'suwet'en First Nation and Kelly Mortimer gave a presentation titled Best Practices for Building Relationships Between Local Governments and First Nation Governments. Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations Minister Katrine Conroy is the final speaker in the series on January the 12th, 2022. On November 25th, I attended the Summerland Chamber of Commerce AGM and was pleased to swear in the board of directors. More about the chamber later in this report. In a committee of the whole meeting on November the 29th, council enjoyed a second presentation by Anona Campi of the Penticton Indian Band, and we hope to get out on the land for a guided tour later in the spring. Later in the meeting, council received a presentation on the design concepts that came out of the community engagement and first half day of the 2-day Eco Village Design Show. I attended the virtual 2021 Community Water Forum on November the 30th. This annual event is hosted by UBCO in partnership with the Okanagan Basin Water Board and the Okanagan Nation Alliance. This year, project leads shared their knowledge and expertise and introduced the research project taking place in the Peachland Creek Community Watershed. This project will be of particular interest to the district as the 2 watersheds that we rely on border the Peachland Creek watershed. Source water protection is a big deal in local governments and is one of council's strategic priorities. Last fall, the BC government committed to developing a BC watershed security fund above and beyond the $27 million for the Healthy Watersheds initiative. The timing of the 2021 Community Water Forum and OBWB's November release of the Source Water Protection Toolkit aligns perfectly with the December 7th webinar on the BC Watershed Security Fund Strategic Directions paper developed by the Sustainable Funding Working Group. We, as the working group, met regularly over a 4-month period following our mandate to investigate the opportunity and potential for a BC Watershed Security Fund, to outline a bold vision for the fund, and to develop recommendations or options for what the fund could do and how it could be created. This fund will help local and First Nations governments throughout BC with projects that protect and make the best use of this critical natural resource. Jumping back a week now to the evening of November 30th, when I joined Chamber President Ron Kubek and MLA Dan Ashton at a virtual Light Up Summerland message. Due to COVID restrictions, Council asked the Chamber to revise their plans for the 2021 Festival Light Celebration. The Chamber returned with a terrific plan that Council unanimously supported for funding and in-kind contributions by district staff. The 3-day event, running December 4th, 11th, and 18th, includes some new activities and honors traditional activities. All are done in a COVID-safe manner. Based on what I've heard, the community is enjoying the Light Up Summerland activities, and participation has been very good. My thanks to the Chamber for organizing 3 weekends of events, to Downtown Summerland businesses, the museum, and George Riva Arts and Cultural Center for their decorating efforts and for expanding their hours for Christmas shoppers, to homeowners who have decorated their houses and yards for the enjoyment of others, to the winter series at Bottleneck Drive events, and to district staff for all their behind-the-scenes work. Summerland has never looked so festive. You can visit summerlandlightup.com for more details. Lastly, council received a presentation December the 6th on proposed design concepts for Memorial Park, as well as concepts for the upgrading of the playground at Memorial Park. Both concepts, Memorial Park is part of the downtown neighborhood plan concept, will be available at summerland.ca later this week. Thank you. CAO.
Thank you, Your Worship. Winter weather caused impacts to some public services in the last couple of weeks. On December 6th, our landfill had to close for most of the day due to extreme wind in that location. Intermittent power outages from the wind also affected service to about 600 Summerlanders on December 1st, and heavy snowfall was seen in the district in the same time frame. Crews from our electric utility and public works responded quickly and efficiently, and I'm glad to say at this time, we enjoy clear roads and all of our city services are back to regular levels. The supply chain remains strained due to the record flooding from Hope and Merritt to Vancouver. One of our suppliers for the electrical utility has indicated that their Chilliwack plant will be shut down because they cannot get the materials to the plant in a timely manner and therefore cannot plan any sort of production schedule. It is reported that our rail service for that supplier has gone from 5 days guaranteed delivery to 21 days for at least the next month. We maintain a stock of key items in our inventory. However, these impacts will begin to strain our own supply and in some cases our own timelines for service requests or repair. Municipal Hall and our front office services at Public Works will be closed for Christmas holiday from 2 p.m. Friday, December 24th, reopening on Tuesday, January 4th, 2022. The pool and arena will remain open much of this time, and of course, snow removal, garbage, and other services will continue to be provided during this period. Residents are reminded to consult the district website for changes in regular hours of operation due to statutory holidays. Utility payments are due December 22nd. Any payments can also be made through online banking or deposited or drop box at the front doors of the Municipal Hall if it's closed. If experiencing an after-hours emergency specific to water, sewer, roads, parks, or the electrical utility, residents can call 250-493-0005 for assistance and information. With that, I wrap up my report.
Great. Thank you, Graham. Any questions, council, on either of our reports? Okay. On to the first public comment opportunity. Do we have anyone waiting? No. Okay, thank you. So development reports 9.1 official community plan amendment bylaw and zoning amendment bylaw for 5700 Monroe Avenue, Z21-011.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So this proposal is for a concurrent official community plan amendment and rezoning of the property at 5700 Monroe Avenue. So the proposal is to change the official community plan land use designation of the property from agricultural to rural residential, and to change the zoning from A1 agricultural small acreage to CR1 country residential. So the purpose of these amendments is to facilitate a carriage house on the property. The property currently contains a house and an accessory building towards the rear of the property, which was used as a kennel, and you can see it in the background photos here. So the current OCP designation is agricultural, And as you can see on the map, there is a mix of agricultural, shown in dark green, as well as rural residential parcels on the middle avenue. And you can also see that the property abuts the Pebble Valley Rail Trail there. Line going through, and the proposed OCP designation is for rural residential, which allows for smaller parcels of 1 hectare in size. So the property is outside of the urban growth area, and it's also in an area where no community sewer is available. So the OCP restricts unserviced lots to 1 hectare in accordance with provincial guidelines. Every other residential lot requires sewer. So essentially our OCP is stating that given the provincial guidelines, we have a 1 hectare policy for lots that are having that aren't serviced by community sewer and not septic systems, and that supports our 1 hectare policy. So there is a provincial directive that the district has adopted for a 1 hectare lot size for non-sewered areas of the community in order to maintain eligibility for future sewer infrastructure and grant programs. So the OCP acknowledges this policy, and it was put in place to ensure that our eligibility for programming in the future is maintained. So currently, the district receives $261,000 a year in grant funding from the Okanagan Basin Water Board. And the current financial plan assumes continued eligibility to receive OEW funding. So what are the eligibility requirements to receive that grant funding? That would equate, if we lost that funding, right now, that would equate to a 16.96% sewer rate increase to cover the funding gap. So it's an important part of our financial plan, and it's an important part of funding to help with our sewer infrastructure projects. And in order to be eligible to receive those funds through OBWB, the district needs to have bylaws in place to prevent carriage houses on properties that are less than 1 hectare that are not serviced by community sewer. We also are not to have subdivisions of properties that are less than 1 hectare that are not connected to community sewer. So the OCP essentially has 1 hectare policy to support and direct us to uphold these bylaws that we have the district to prevent lots that are less than 1 hectare and are serviced by on-site septic to not have carriage houses, not to be further subdivided. So this funding has historically contributed to projects like the wastewater treatment plant, the centrifuge facility, and the expansion of sewer services to Pierre Drive, Juniper Street, Milmore Avenue, Willow Avenue, and Peach Street. So these are important projects for the community. So it's extremely important to keep this funding and to maintain eligibility of the requirements of OBWB. So that means the continuance of preventing carriage houses on properties that are less than 1 hectare that don't have access to community sewer. And it means to continue to prevent subdivision of properties to create properties that are less than 1 hectare unless they're connected to community sewer. So the current zoning for this application, the applicant is seeking to go from a zone that does not allow for carriage houses to one that does. They are requesting the CR1 zone, which has a minimum parcel size of 1 hectare And this parcel size requirement that is in the CR1 zone is seen as supporting the 1 hectare policy, as most of the CR1 zones in the district are not connected to sewer. So in different circumstances, creating a non-conforming parcel under a zoning bylaw may not pose that much of a risk. But in this case, there are significant grant funding implications. If a carriage house was to be approved and built on this property, it would put at risk the OBWP grant funding that was described. So staff does not want to intentionally create a scenario of a non-conforming parcel size and opening up our OCP and zoning to facilitate a parcel that would be in contravention of the 1 hectare policy, and that being the intent of the proposal. So in comparing the two zones, the A1 zone is the current zone on the left-hand side, and again, the CR1 zone is on the right. So there's lots of uses that are available under the current zoning, including single detached housing, manufactured housing. It's available in both zones. There's also additional uses that agriculture that are permitted currently on the property. Of the most significant change and the purpose of the application for the CR1 zone is to add that secondary use for a carriage house, which again, because of the lot size, would violate the 1 hectare policy if it was to go forward. I will also note that a further variance would be required to our bylaws. We do have it written in the zoning that a carriage house must either be connected to sewer or located on a property that is greater than 1 hectare as a regulation under the carriage house zoning requirements. So if this zoning went forward, a further variance would be required to allow for that to occur. But this is the first step in the process, and it is something that would signal that that would somehow be an acceptable use. And in this case, with the WB funding being potentially at risk, and there being no other purpose of the application, don't want that to go forward. And just to note that the current zone allows for reasonable use of the property. It actually allows for several other things that the proposed zone doesn't allow for. And there isn't any pressing reason to change the OCP and zoning at this time. So the applicant did provide a site plan. So the issue with this application is simply the parcel size. It's less than 1 hectare and is serviced by on-site septic, not a community sewer system. So the parcel size is 0.975 hectares. So it is just shy of that requirement. So this may seem like a very small difference, but it's a difference that if a carriage house was put on that property, it's something that the district allowed, then it would put all of that grant funding at risk. And this is something that was confirmed through comments from OBWB directly, which is included in your council package. So I just want to stress the importance of receiving this funding each year as something that is important to our community infrastructure project initiatives for providing sewer to the community. So in terms of internal comments, again, main one to highlight here is that if approval was granted to construct a carriage house on the parcel, that's less than 1 hectare, this option would jeopardize eligibility to the grant funding programs for sewer infrastructure projects, and that a future development variance permit would not be supported, as it would put that grant funding from OPWP at risk. There are other comments here, but I think that the main focus of this particular application and the objections to it are really focused around that 1 hectare policy and the applicant seeking a carriage house on a property that is less than 1 hectare that isn't served. So this item did also get reviewed by the Advisory Planning Commission. There was general support for the country residential use. It was acknowledged that there were other country residential zones in that area, so it was a mix on Monroe of 1 hectare kind of country-sized residential parcels as well as agriculture. So that was something that was acknowledged by the APC. But they also acknowledged the importance of not jeopardizing grant funding. And they had some questions about other options that might be available, such as a secondary suite, which would not jeopardize grant funding. And although that option is available, that's not what the application is seeking at this time. So the 1 hectare policy is a long-standing policy, and that was also acknowledged by the APC. There were some comments that that might be an outdated policy due to the technological advancements that have been made over recent decade or 15 years or so about on-site septic systems. And just kind of as a historical reference, the 1 hectare policy was something that was put in place to protect all of the Okanagan basin, and all of the surrounding local governments do participate in the 1 hectare policy to help preserve the watershed that is protecting the Okanagan Lake. And the 1 hectare policy is essentially put in place to ensure water quality. So the APC then moved that the amendments be denied by council. And that is also the staff recommendation today of the official committee plan amendment bylaw and zoning bylaw amendments that are in front of you be denied. It's staff's belief that it is absolutely paramount that the 1 hectare policy be upheld, and these zoning amendments before you are the first step in not upholding these policies. And the intent of this particular proposal is to put forward a development that would violate the 1 hectare policy and put in jeopardy important grant funding. And for that reason, staff is not in support of the bylaws moving forward. And because of the negative recommendation of staff, just want to remind that if a negative motion is brought forward, that the applicant is in the audience tonight and available to speak to the application. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Joanne. Mike, would you care to come forward and speak further about the application?
Yes, please.
Okay, please come forward.
Good evening again. Yeah, I understand that you guys are, this is bound by that water basin policy, and that's that 1 hectare is that line. Of course, it's 0.975 hectares, and just for perspective on that, the first row of parking in the city hall parking, that's that size. It's not very big, like it's 10 meters by 25 meters. Originally, this lot should have been 1 hectare. All these lots to the north and to the east of it are CR1 that are also undersized. They are 2.41 acres, and that lot is 2.42. And then the lot to the north is also undersized 1 hectare, it's 2.45 acres, which 2.47 is 1 hectare. So I don't know when they got all rezoned, they should have been all 1 hectare theoretically, but it also isn't, just too bad. So another thing to note would be that we did advise, the clients that they could build a secondary suite there as an option that is available in that zoning. The current zoning, of course, is A1, which is, it's not conforming to that as well. That's supposed to be minimum 2 hectares and it's not. So anyways, their option could be to build a secondary suite, but they do want to build a carriage house because they have a son that has just married and they got a baby on the way and they want to be separate of their house, and that's all. And they would use the existing kennels, which is already there, as a base for the footprint. And another thing to note would be that the draw on the septic systems, beyond the fact that the technology is much better now and all that, they could put a secondary suite there with the extra load on it, and wouldn't be any more load than adding a carriage home as well. In fact, you could build a bigger secondary suite and have more bedrooms in it, and more draw on the original house than you could just with an additional carriage home. The septic system there now is actually over designed for the house. It's designed for a 4-bedroom, 3-bath. That is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. It's oversized right now. The flow coming out of that septic system is 1,773 liters, and to provide for that house there now, you would only need 1,300. If you were to add a carriage home, it would be another 700, so that's 2,000. So it's just under that. But what I'm saying is that it's kind of a moot point in terms of the flow. But so I understand that we're bound by that water basin policy, but that policy I feel is outdated and should be looked at maybe in cases like this where the properties are so far out of the reachable, area to be hooked up to city sewer. Maybe there's some kind of, policy that could come through to look at that. I don't know, but obviously there's one in place now. But that would be my comments on that.
Thank you. Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm looking at the site plan. Is there any way through our CAO, through the staff, can we bring up this on the GIS mapping? So we get a proper picture of the current development of the lot.
I'm just looking at grade here to see what's in the realm of feasible in this setup. We'll see, we do have wireless, so we got to look at the district's GIS, the district's GIS, public assistant. I think the answer is yes to that, so it's just going to take us.
I appreciate this, because the lot to the north has been newly developed, I'm gonna say, over the past maybe 5 years, if not sooner. It's been indicated it's under a hectare. It's got a house on it. I'd like to know what the square footage is and how many bedrooms. And also, it has a carriage home, and we gave a variance for a 2-car garage on that property, which is absolutely adjacent to the one we're talking about tonight. And if it's under a hectare, how did that happen?
See, I don't know if we gave a variance for the carriage, but I know we gave, this council gave a variance for 2-car garage attached to the carriage.
Racket answering that, stuff, GS, being uploaded. So, yeah, I do have it in front of my computer, the GS, and I'll copy with council that happen. I don't know the details of that specific property offhand. We don't have that information on this. However, the house is relatively new, looks like from the aerial photo. The council may have provided a variance to the accessory building in the past, which is allowed. But the approval of the carriage house would have as well broken the 1 hectare rule in regards to that. Something because it is less than the size. So if there is an existing carriage house, perhaps that's an enforcement issue. But the carriage house itself would not have followed the policy. And there was a period in time where the 1 hectare rule was not being enforced by the District of Summerland. And for that reason, we were not receiving grant funding. Council subsequently changed our OCP and zoning bylaw to reaffirm the 1 hectare rule following that period. It was around 2015 and 16 with the 1 hectare rule back into this. So that could be a period of time where something was approved when the 1 hectare rule was not being followed.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm almost positive that the carriage house was built with a permit. The gentleman that owns the property is a developer in the community. And the garage was passed by this council on a variance. I met with the owners of the property that are asking for the carriage house, and it's for their son and his wife and baby. And it was brought up earlier, theoretically, they could move it to a suite in the house. It's the same amount of effluent going into the ground. There's no difference. You know, so I understand the rules, but there's got to be some common sense played here too. It's not like we're adding a whole bunch more waste water into the ground. So it makes no sense to me.
Councillor Barkle, and then, oh, did you want to respond, Brad?
Yeah, if I may. There's been a number of examples, I know throughout the Okanagan region, of cases where it just makes sense to allow this rule to be flexed in terms of it's needed for family purposes as an elderly individual that needed care. I've seen a number of examples of it. In every case, the OBW has been firm that they're not going to bend on this rule, and the grant funding will not be provided to the District of Summerland moving forward. So it's unfortunate that this is a rule that is still in place, perhaps with changes in technology. There can be a discussion at a more regional level of this policy changing. But unfortunately, the District of Summerland can't make that change on its own. This is a larger discussion that has to happen at the provincial level, most likely, before there can be changes at the OBWB level. So my advice to council.
Council Barkle, and then Trainer, and then Patton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In some ways, in some ways, I'm kind of glad this has come before us here, because this arbitrary 1 hectare rule has bothered me for a long time, probably from before I was on council. I think that the revision to the bylaws that the Director of Development Services is referring to is just to bring the writing of the bylaw into conformity with change in the bylaws, but Summerland has always adhered to this 1 hectare rule. And as I said, it is arbitrary, and as the opponent has said, it's out of date. I don't understand why an organization would be so inflexible. And, and I think we should bring this to a head. It just makes no sense in the current world that we live. It's not 35 years ago when Summerland didn't even have a sewer system to begin with. And all that there's effluent in the lake, and it was a big issue until 1998 when we got started on the sewer system. That was a different situation altogether. Nowadays, we have more pressure for more housing. We have increased and improved technology, and there could be 1.1 hectare places where you shouldn't put in another load on another sewer load. And there could be half hectare places where you could put 3 more houses. And so in today's world, this just doesn't make sense to me. And I'm glad we've got the opportunity to maybe bring this forward, start something with the Basin Water Board. We have our rep here, Mr. Councilor Holmes. Is this being discussed at the board level?
Councilor Jenner.
Yeah, I agree with what Councilor Bartlett just said. I think what we have for us today, unfortunately, in my opinion, we don't really have a choice because we read that the $261,000 is really important. It's part of our budget. But my question is for the proponents that were speaking before. What you said makes sense as well. Have you, I mean, we can do this, but have you approached the Open Basin Water Board and told them of the situation? Because I think you make some good arguments. And, I don't even know if citizens can approach or if it can just be government.
I did speak with them the other day. I did call them and speak with them, and just kind of asked, about their policy and their plan of updating it. Should be something that should be based on maybe an effluent flow and proximity to different waters or whatever versus a strict 1 hectare thing. Because, as you said, there's a lot of variances and flux there in terms of, drainage and the size of the properties. So it should be based more on the flow rate, restriction to a certain size rather than just size. So I did discuss that with them. Of course, they said at the time they hadn't planned on reviewing anything like that. But I only spoke with one person. It would be something that I would definitely manage into pursuing. I think it's worth looking at that because in areas like this, especially in this case, like it's so far out of the sewer area. I mean, how long is it going to be before anything gets in close to that area? And how many areas are there like that? And density is going to happen in these areas. And the Okanagan's in general is just booming right now in terms of that. They're expecting 80,000 more people coming into Kelowna in 5 years. So there will be these issues of housing, people trying to find housing. And there's rents. The people next to me at ODC they're renting that place for almost $3,000 a month, and it's just a rundown house built in the 40s. That shouldn't be happy.
Excuse me, Mike Neal. Can we please speak to the matter that's before us tonight?
Yeah. So
Thank you.
yeah. So then that would be all I have to say about that. Yeah, because then I did approach them, and they hadn't planned on doing it currently. They would like pursue some energy into that.
Thank you for that.
Councilor Patton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just around the state that we think back into 2019. Closer. In 2019, Carriage House and School members, and it was Corey Gain at that time that brought it forward and pulled the Carriage House out of the CR1 zone and the agricultural zone because of the Okanagan Water Board. And so, but at that time it was brought up that we talked about the small lots that fell outside of the guidelines. And at that time, we were assured by our previous development services director that those could come before us and that we could look at them and we're assured at that time, and you may remember, that our funding wouldn't be jeopardized over these small lots. And that's why we have the carriage house that's right next door. If you go straight south of this property, there's at least another 3 or 4 on the road on Morrow. So this isn't something that is outside of the realm that we've already been doing. And I want to just talk about what Councillor Barkwell talked about. And the new sewer treatment plants that are out there do not even incorporate a field system. They're aerated, and by the time the solids go to the effluent, which is aerated, it comes out and it's already potable water, well, water that can be put into your ground without having to worry about doing any.
Councillor Patton, I am also going to ask you to speak to the matter that is before us tonight.
Okay, so anyways, where I'm going with this, Madam Mayor, is we discussed this back in 2019 when we changed the bylaw and we took it out. And here's a perfect example when it comes back to us and we sit here and we have staff tell us, sorry, it's the bylaw. And that is what we talked about that wouldn't happen. So anyways, thank you so much.
Any other questions? Oh, Brad, please.
Sorry, just a comment on that one, if I can. The bylaw is not really the issue at hand here. The bylaw can be changed at any point through the rezoning process. Council can decide to move forward with rezoning. As well, council can consider any variance to the 1 hectare rule at any point they so choose. Our staff recommendation is we're advising you not to. You guys can go ahead with it, but we're advising you not to because of the implications for grant funding in the future. That is the main reason. That's nothing to do with the bylaw itself. It's everything to do with future grant funding. Council just this afternoon gave us direction for a potential sewer expansion project. There's a 27% local improvement contribution to that grant project for the federal level. 60% of that 25% amount can be funded by OBWB. That potential future funding may not be available to us if we move forward with this rezoning. That's our advice.
Thank you, Brad. I often say it's not all about the money, but in this case, it's all about the money. I don't think we can risk it. Councillor Barco.
I would like to see the Okanagan Basin Water Board representative who goes home and faces his friends and family and says, we denied grant funding to a really good project in Summerland because I think we should stick to this arbitrary rule of 1 hectare, and it doesn't matter to me that you could put 6 houses on that property. We've got a 1 hectare rule. That's the rule. And heck with them. Who could go home and face the public and face the people with an attitude like that?
Okay, do you have a question, Councillor Barco? That's relevant? Any other questions relevant to the discussion? Okay, I'm going Councillor Carlson and then Councillor Bennell.
Thank you. It's all very interesting to listen to what's going on. I think my question is, if we deny this and then council proposed we talk to the OBWB and we try and have a little bit more conversation and find out, 0.975, that's not, it's correct, it's not very big. It's about the size of a carriage house. And I'm just wondering, if we deny it, does the whole thing go away? Can we table this and try and connect with OBWB and see if there's any conversation to be had? Is it worth trying to do that in a political way, or is it simply that we don't think that's going to change at all?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor Carlson, to the mayor. Yeah, I think my staff recommendation, council, is to give a clear decision at tonight's meeting. That doesn't stop council from advocating for changes to a more regional policy in the future, and perhaps this applicant comes initiates their application at a later point in time. The policy change from OBWB will probably be a long process if they're going to make that change. It involves all of the local governments in the Okanagan Basin, so all the regional districts as well. So doing all the way up to 7 months. So it's going to take some time.
And also, as we heard from Joanne, it's a directive of the province too, so it's not at that level. Okay, Councilor Van Alphen, you had a question?
Clarification if I may through to planning. There was a wastewater practitioner that looked at this site for the carriage home and approved a septic field.
Yes, there was a group that did a site evaluation of the property in August of this year to assess whether the site was acceptable for the development of the disposal system to the and facts reports of the test hole and soils evaluation at that time indicate that there's adequate suitable area for the development of a sewage disposal system for 1 bedroom charge home.
Are there any other questions? Councilor Barton.
So, history here, but I think it's been said that the lot immediately to the north has a carriage home, and it's not 1 hectare, and the sky will not fall in. And whoever the lots immediately to the east, their zone country residential, and they're not 1 hectare. Could they be putting a carriage home on without our approval? Just have to be a process for them.
So currently, we do have a specific use regulation for carriage homes that requires the property be over 1 hectare in size. Again, I can't tell you the history of that one property to the north. However, if any of the other adjacent landowners came forward, even though they had the existing zoning, they would be part of variance.
Councilor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There's a lot more stuff on the agenda, so I'd like to move a motion, if that's okay. All right, I'd like to move that the official community plan amendment at 5700 Monroe Avenue, bylaw number 2021-040, and zoning bylaw amendment at 5700 Monroe Avenue, bylaw 2021-041 be denied.
Secretary, Councilor Trainer. Further discussion. Councilor Patton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Would it be possible, and I'm not sure if Okanagan Development would be up for this, but to, if we deny this, I believe that is that they can't apply again for 6 months, I believe. And that would be, and then they would have to pay their fee over again. I would really like to see us table this, have Okanagan Development go to the Okanagan Water Basin Board, talk to them with their wastewater practitioner about a treatment plant where it doesn't drop the effluent into the ground, and see if they would be willing to look at an alternative solution in regards to that. So that we don't deny this and put these poor folks back another 6 months plus another development fee, if at all possible. Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Holmes.
I'm just wondering how what Council Patton suggested would work. For a corporate office.
Repeat that again.
How was the suggestion work? Councilor Patton's going to the board?
We have the current motion on the floor, so you could put the motion to table these amendments. So it could be, that they be tabled until further discussion with the OW or take place, or you could table it to a certain time.
Brad?
Just to further inform council on that idea, there is a provision in the Local Government Act, and it's also within this development procedures bylaw, the council may elect to waive the reapplication period. So if there was a change of approach with regards to the 1 hectare policy, council can elect to waive the waiting period as well as potentially waive the fee if they so choose in the future for a new application to be reinitiated for this specific proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Holmes?
So yeah, I suggest we do that. I certainly understand the arbitrariness of all this. It's really bad luck. Perhaps the proponent can find another 0.25 hectares to add to the property somehow. But I would certainly encourage them to go to the OPWB, as well as I would also be keen for us to write to the OPWB to start the motion of requesting a review of the 1 hectare policy. But as our Director of Development Services said, I don't think I think that's going to be a long process. And but let's start the ball rolling.
Okay, any further discussion on the motion that's on the floor? Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. After we dealt with this motion, I'd like to put forward another motion concerning what Councilor Holmes just discussed. So it's going to move on too quickly, so I get a chance to put forward another motion.
Okay, perhaps you could put forward a notice of motion at the appropriate time in the agenda, but that's just a suggestion. Okay, let's vote on the matter that's on the floor. All those in favor of denying? And opposed? So that carries. Okay. Councillor Barton.
I'd like to put forward a motion that council direct staff to write to the Okanagan Basin Water Board and encourage them as a matter of policy to revisit the 1 hectare rule and to develop a more, I think of the word, more site specific or site.
Seconder, Councillor Patton. Discussion? Okay, I'll start with the discussion. I will be voting against this motion. We heard from Brad in our package itself, it talks about the benefits to not only our district, but anybody that's in the Economic Basin Water Board to having this policy in place. It speaks to it being consistent with provincial policies around sewer infrastructure funding. Currently, Summerland receives over $260,000 a year through this program and is eligible for any future sewering, including the Deer Ridge that we just spoke about today. And I'd also like to remind council that we have in our strategic priorities, I mentioned it in my mayor's report tonight, one of our strategic priorities is source water protection. We don't want to put any funding that may help us with protecting our watersheds at risk. While I feel for Mr. Neild and the applicant that he's representing, because this seems to be so wishy-washy for this particular spot, for the Okanagan Basin Water Board to take on a policy that is simply following a directive of the provincial government and look at a case-by-case basis throughout all of the municipalities and regional districts of the Okanagan Basin Water Board, I think is ludicrous. So I definitely will not be supporting this resolution. Yes, Councillor Barker and then Councillor Pat.
Madam Mayor, I think I have a little trouble with my words that you misunderstood what I was proposing. I'm proposing that they review the policy. I'm saying asking them to review the policy that would put anything list with us. I'm not proposing that they examine every location that is seeking to be system. It's a professional guidance. Professional guidance. Certified.
Thank you. Perhaps it wasn't you, Councillor Barker, but there was a councillor that was talking about a site-by-site examination. Councillor Patton and then Councillor Trainer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I agree. I think we have to approach the water board. This is from out of the letter from James Lidley to the district, and it said most of the original pollution was due to untreated sewage and a lack of infrastructure. Most of that type of water pollution today comes from failing or unmaintained septic tanks. So we have to deal with apples to apples and oranges to oranges. This will be a brand new septic system or brand new waste treatment system. So I think that the water board really does have to take a look and see the new technologies and not rely on 1970s data. Thank you.
Councillor Trainer.
We are part of the Okanagan Basin Water Board. And how I see a letter like this is, I think that it's worth sharing our feedback, just to let them know the kinds of things that we're dealing with, like today, what we were dealing with, and how it kind of puts us in this awkward position. And, for whatever it's worth, I think it is important that we just let them know how it's going and share this example. And I mean, they need to know what municipalities are dealing with. So that's kind of how I see it. I just see it as sharing our feedback and saying, this is what we're experiencing. So when if you do consider revisiting this 1 hectare rule, here's our experience. That's kind of how I see it.
Great. Anyone else? Kendra, could I have you read the motion, please?
So what I have so far is that council directs staff to draft a letter to the Okanagan Basin Water Board to consider reviewing the 1 hectare policy in relation to the Sewerage Facilities Assistance Grant Program and potentially develop site-specific consideration for carriage house requests.
So site-specific is in the motion. Thank you. Okay, sorry. Brett, please go ahead.
I just add to that motion, just to clarify to council, is it the way the current motion is worded that Kendra read out specific carriage house request, but do you want the 1 hectare rule also considered for 1 hectare lots? Because that's minimum parcel size for residential lots with unserved areas right now. So it's not just carriage homes, like the rule applies to subdivision as well.
Thank you. Councilor Carlson.
I think this is something that needs more time, and I think it should come back as a notice of motion in January so that it can actually be dealt with properly instead of just one person thinks something should go to the OBWB, someone else thinks it should look at something else, and we should write something else, and I would suggest that perhaps this gets put aside for a moment.
Thank you, Councilor Carlson. We do have a motion. Oh, Graham.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a perspective to, as council considers advocacy options, I do wonder if it may form into potentially a UPCM or SILGA resolution type conversation if significant momentum might need to be gathered from a larger group of parties that are affected by the 1 hectare policy. Just throwing that out there for consideration in due course.
Okay, any further discussion on this motion? Pardon me?
Can I move to table the motion? I won't support, I can't support it as it is, but I do see some value to doing this.
Okay, just a minute. You asked a question. I'm waiting for the answer from our corporate officer.
So a way to essentially kill the motion is we can, Councilor Carlson or whatever council can move that the motion be postponed indefinitely.
Would you like to do that?
Yes, I would like to do that. I would move to postpone the motion indefinitely.
Is there a second? Councilor Holmes? Further discussion on this motion? Councilor Barker?
I think that this discussion is going off in a very good direction. Yes, should be expanded. So, yes, support Councilor Carlson. Do that with the intention that we'll have to do it properly.
Thank you, Councilor Barker. Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor of tabling this indefinitely? And any opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you, Councilor Holmes. Okay. He's looking at the clock over there. Thank you, Councilor Carlson. So we're on to 9.2, short-term rentals, regulatory. Sorry, before we go ahead, Joanne, I have a question of the corporate officer. No, never mind. I was just thinking back that we hadn't ever talked about the denial, but we didn't pass. Okay, and it did pass. Okay, so on to 9.2, short-term rentals regulatory framework, Z 21-015.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the purpose of this presentation is to introduce the draft regulatory framework for the short-term rentals project. And this includes 5 separate bylaw amendments. So these would be amendments to the district zoning bylaw, business licensing bylaw, fees and charges bylaw, bylaw notice enforcement bylaw, and the ticketing information utilization bylaw. So this presentation focuses on the zoning and licensing aspects of the regulatory framework, as these bylaws set the parameters for what a short-term rental can be and how it is licensed. The other bylaws are more administrative to support the licensing program. So the fees and charges amendment is simply to include a licensing fee for short-term rental, which is set at $500. And the bylaw notice enforcement, bylaw amendments and the ticketing information utilization bylaw is to set fines and ticketing offenses to support enforcement of specific zoning and licensing requirements. The purpose of that would be to ensure that there are suitable deterrents in place as we move forward with implementing the framework. So just to remind council, this is how we got to this point. I'll just quickly review the timeline. So staff brought forward a report to council on August 23rd, outlining various approaches that were used in other communities. And council directed staff to draft a permissive approach and initiate public engagement. So in September, we went live with that project, launched website on webpage on the district's website, and also initiated a survey and did an open house in October. And then when council received the results of that public engagement on the November 22nd council meeting, and also directed staff at that meeting to include a requirement that a permanent resident be on site as part of the framework. So we initially started drafting a regulatory approach to allow and license short-term rentals in a fairly permissive way through public engagement. We received feedback, and then since rewritten the draft in light of council's direction for the permanent resident requirement. So this essentially is kind of shifting from a permissive approach like the city of Penticton, where short-term rentals are allowed in a variety of dwelling types and zones, to something more like West Kelowna, where a resident needs to be on site, and results in limiting the amount of, or the types of dwellings that can meet that requirement. So the draft bylaws attached to the council report for consideration today are meant to incorporate council's direction for a permanent resident on site. It's also meant to provide a unified approach for all temporary accommodation within dwellings, and to provide clarity of a regulatory framework for everybody involved moving forward on how we want to address short-term rentals in the community. So council's direction to require a permanent resident on site did a couple of things. First, it limited rental of entire dwellings to instances where there's only where there's 2 dwellings on available on the property, one for a permanent resident and then one for a short-term rental. So staff saw this as significantly narrowing the gap between a traditional bed and breakfast and a standalone short-term rental. So right now, under the zoning bylaw, we allow for bed and breakfasts and in the zones that are shown on the map there. And this is limited to renting out rooms that are part of a single detached house. And the bed and breakfast is run by a quote unquote live-in resident, which is used as a term in the bylaw, but undefined. And bed and breakfasts are allowed in agricultural, rural residential, and urban residential zones as an accessory use. And they also have specific regulations, including occupancy limits, parking requirements, There are some specifications about bedroom sizes, and restricting kitchens within those guest rooms and so on. So the proposed regulations are seeking to, instead of having two fairly similar uses where you're allowing for temporary accommodation of tourists in a dwelling, this proposed zoning amendment incorporates what a traditional bed and breakfast is into the definition of a short-term rental. So just using one umbrella term for both those uses, whether it be rental of a room or and one of the other shifts here is that is aligning with the current bed and breakfast regulations. This would then allow for short-term rentals agricultural. So in terms of shifting the framework in terms of what we were looking at before, the items in red on the table are what was kind of removed from that initial concept and framework. And then the green are things that were changed in the draft. So the more permissive approach allowed for short-term rentals in urban residential, rural residential, and select commercial zones. And the select commercial zones were taken out just because they no longer applied when you were looking at the types of dwellings that we were seeking to implement. So originally it was all types of dwellings, including multifamily and duplexes. So the new draft is more limited in terms of the dwellings included. So essentially, single family, so single detached dwellings, and manufactured homes, carriage houses, and secondary suites. And in terms of how many guests, we quoted the idea of 6 maximum for short-term rental under the assumption that that there would be a permanent resident. The new draft aligns with what we permit a bed and breakfast to have, which is the use of up to 4 bedrooms and 8 guests. And then there's originally no additional parking requirement, just to keep simplicity of the bylaw. The new draft kind of in a to react to some of the comments in terms of parking issues being probably one of the main concerns coming out of the short-term rental survey. We added a +1 requirement. So what is required under the bylaw for the type of dwelling that we have +1 additional. Again, this is also aligning with the bed and breakfast policies as well, which require additional parking of 1 for 2 guests. So under the new draft, short-term rental can operate in a single detached dwelling, manufactured housing, a carriage house, or a secondary suite. So short-term rentals are not proposed as a permitted use for duplex units, townhouse units, or permanent units. So it's essentially 3 types of dwellings: you have main house, carriage house, and secondary suite. So in using those 3 types of dwellings, there's essentially 3 options on how to run a short-term rental. So again, going back to that idea of short-term rental being an umbrella term that incorporates what we consider to be a more traditional bed and breakfast with a rental of an entire dwelling. So a short-term rental could be renting out bedrooms within a primary residence where you have common areas that are shared with that resident, so essentially a bed and breakfast, or the rental of an entire dwelling unit that is not the primary residence. So just a couple of examples of what that would look like. In the first example, you have 1 residence, so you essentially can rent out guest rooms within there, within the home while you're there. And you would be sharing common areas. So essentially what we allow now is a bed and breakfast. Second option would be when you have a carriage house and a house on the property. So one of those would be the permanent residence, and then the other would be the rental that's available for short-term rental of the entire unit. And again, option 3, that would be very similar in terms of having a house with a secondary suite, like a basement suite. So again, one of those could be the residence, and then the other would be an entire unit that could be rented out. So there is flexibility in terms of whether that permanent resident is in the smaller unit or the larger unit. But there would be a requirement for resident and then availability for that entire other unit to be rented out. So there are 2 options in terms of who can operate a short-term rental. So there's some flexibility built into the draft for renting out entire units. And this is a provision that was kind of modeled after the District of Tofino. And this option is, the first option is kind of a traditional scenario where the resident is being the operator, so they're living on site and then they're renting out the short-term rental, and they're the ones that are managing it. The other option that allows for the short-term rental to be managed by a professional management company. It still requires that there's a primary resident that lives on the property, but the management of the short-term rental isn't directly linked to that. So one of the benefits, which is shown here, is that you can potentially have a short-term rental, and then you can have another residence that is a primary resident that can be a long-term renter. And then the short-term rental is then operated by a professional management company, but it does allow for that other unit to be contributing to long-term rental housing stock. So under all of the scenarios in terms of allowing for a short-term rental, there are a couple of minimums and maximums. So this is what I'm calling the ones. So there's a minimum of 1 primary residence that's required. So at least 1 person or household is living on the property for the majority of the year. And then there's also a minimum of 1 additional parking stall. And this parking stall is in addition to how many are required for those base units. So a house with a suite, for example, with a short-term rental would equate to 4 parking stalls. So 2 for the main residence, 1 for the suite, and then additional plus 1 for having the short-term rental on site. There's also a maximum of 1 short-term rental on property. So these are the provisions in the zoning bylaw. So if somebody wants to operate a short-term rental, they would need to meet all of these requirements first. So the second part of the equation is obtaining a business license. So this is where we're asking for more details about the business and ensuring that it is safe and is not meant to cause a nuisance in the neighborhood. So this includes a health and safety inspection and signing of the neighbor agreement. And the details of the health and safety inspection are included in the council package. Just as a reference, the checklist is modeled very closely to the city of Penticton's and what they are using right now for their health and safety inspections. And it is something that we have reviewed with our building department and fire department in consultation as to what they feel is needed to ensure that those meet life safety requirements. So in terms of what an applicant would need to bring to the district when they were applying for a business license, this would be a parking plan, a floor plan, a emergency fire safety plan, and operator declaration. So essentially figuring out who's going to be responsible for operating the unit. And if they are claiming that there's a long-term tenant there and it's not an owner-operator situation, we would be asking for proof of a long-term rental agreement. And then also, again, if there's a professional manager that is going to be involved, that we have documentation as to that they have agreed to operate that short-term rental. There's also, again, requirements under the business licensing bylaw for whoever's operating to be available during the periods that the short-term rental is being rented out. And legally required to our response, there is a complaint that's been documented in the district essentially response. We have 2 hours to use it. In terms of discussion, so just kind of to recap, we do know that there's active listings in the community. When we checked in over the summer, it was 174. There's probably more active listings than that. Closer to 200. But essentially, knowing that we do have short-term rentals that are occurring within the community, and we're shifting from an approach of being permissive and getting a license, something where it is a bit more restrictive, and that does have the potential of having less license that would be able to be issued, just because not everybody would meet those requirements that are being put forward. So in terms of what those proposed only properties essentially within additional dwelling are eligible to get a license, so community carriage house for secondary suite, or your only option is to run the traditional practice. So if there are current operators out there that are unable to come into compliance with those proposed regulations, there's potential that there's less buy-in. And again, from the community in general, because they know that they're not going to be able to participate in obtaining a license. And there's also anticipated to be less licenses issued, which means less license fees collected, which means less offset cost, and including just required in terms of monitoring programs and also just want to emphasize the difficulty involved with shutting down operators, as it takes more staff time and resources than getting somebody to obtain a license. So this places more workload, it shifts the workload from licensing to bylaw enforcement. And situations are more complex, especially when you're putting somebody out of business, something that is more time consuming of staff to try to gain compliance, especially somebody that is not in position to stop what they are doing. And for this reason, we do have incentives to continue to operate. And I just want to highlight that when you are more restrictive and have less ability of people to obtain a license, you run the risk of removing incentive for people to operate unlicensed and essentially have an unintended dark market of short-term rentals. So again, this becomes where bylaw enforcement is really key to achieving the intended results. And it's required essentially to follow up on shutting down operators that don't comply with the restrictions and being in compliance either through licensing or through getting operators to cease their operations. So one of the benefits of the approach taken is essentially avoiding the scenario of commercial ventures that seek to convert housing supply for long-term to short-term accommodation. And I have mentioned previously to council that that relationship between the short-term rental operating, it isn't a direct relationship to essentially one line of removing one long-term rental off the market, because there are situations where there isn't the intention of property owners that maybe are participating in renting out on a short-term basis that wouldn't participate in renting out on a long-term basis, mainly because they want the flexibility to be able to use their own space when they want to, or they want to use it occasionally for their second home or for their friends and families, and they don't want to be tied into a long-term lease agreement. But the effectiveness of being able to protect the housing supply again and returning houses that were used for short-term rentals back into the housing supply is also reliant on active and effective bylaw enforcement. So bylaw enforcement really is key to making any change between what's currently happening in Summerland and what the proposed bylaws require from coming into fruition. I also just want to point out that where there's a residency component to a bylaw, the district is kind of put in a position where residency will need to be proved, whether that's due to a neighbor complaint suspecting an absentee owner. But it is something that our bylaw officer has pointed out as being something that is very difficult to prove residency or non-residency. And it will require lots of documentation and a significant effort on bylaw enforcement to gather the evidence that's required to prove that somebody is not complying with a residency requirement. And I will also just note that the proof that you might provide during an application process to show that you're a resident can also be misleading, because there are owners that would have the proper documentation to say that they're a resident, but not live there for the majority of the year. So as we incorporate more and more items into the licensing program, there's more things to check, more things to ask for and track down from potential operators. And just to note that there is additional administrative workload that comes with the additional requirements, and also again with dealing with people that that find out that they are unable to meet the requirements to get licensed. So the proposed bylaws did go to the Advisory Planning Commission, and they were generally supportive of regulating short-term rentals. They did have some concerns about the proposed bylaws being too limiting, and there was a lot of different opinions and discussion about this topic. Essentially, whether there was potential to lose sight of the benefits that short-term rentals bring to the community, but also some really positive comments about the benefits of having on-site operators and residents for short-term rentals. So it's, the discussion essentially changed to potentially revisiting this topic later, essentially being supportive of where it stands now, but thinking that potentially it might be something that council wishes to visit in the near future. So the advisory planning commission did provide a supportive recommendation that we draft regulatory framework to regulate and license short-term rentals be supported by council, but they then followed with an additional recommendation that the ABC is generally supportive of the draft regulatory framework for short-term rentals, but also should consider that the regulations may be overly restrictive in requiring owner/principal resident occupancy, and that the regulations should be reviewed in 2 months to determine if changes are required. So, in summary, staff is also generally supportive of moving forward with the drafted framework as a way to implement a licensing program, and this is seen as an improvement over the status quo of what we have in Summerland, and the points raised in the discussion of the report and this presentation are meant to caution council in some of the areas of concern with a more restrictive approach. But is believe that this system will allow for safe, non-destructive short-term rentals to occur when a short-term rental is able to obtain a license. And this is seen as a positive way forward and a good starting point as we launch the licensing program. There are some difficulties that come when there are existing operations that won't be able to obtain a license, and it will face more reliance on bylaw enforcement to have an effective program moving forward. And we will encounter some more complex scenarios in trying to prove bylaw infractions specifically for the residency requirement. But these are challenges that we hope to sort out over time. So our recommendation today is that the well, all of this is actually abbreviated. So there's several bylaws that need to be read for first and second time today. And then we're seeking a scheduling of the public hearing on January 24th. And we're also asking that hearing be held here at the Summerland and Firm at 8820 Jubilee Road East. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Council, are there questions of staff? Councillor Patton and then Councillor Barkle.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I see you have current regulations for bed and breakfast, and then the proposed regulation, we're going under one umbrella term. So we're losing the bed and breakfast. How are you going to deal with the licensed bed and breakfasts that are operating right now?
So the bed and breakfasts that are operating right now and have a license would be licensed under a short-term rental and would be providing the same provisions as a short-term rental that are proposed under this licensing.
Thank you. Some of the requirements that you're asking for, parking plan, the floor plan, emergency fire safety plan, those are already part of the bed and breakfast component. So if you've had bylaw coming into your home for years and fire department coming in, how are you going to deal with this now? They're already in compliance. How are you going to, or what's the means now to bring those people and go to them and say, oh, by the way, we've now changed the name, and how are you going to now gain compliance if they're already in compliance? I guess is my question.
Yeah, through the mayor to Councillor Patton, I don't see a whole lot of things changing from the existing bed and breakfast in terms of the actual inspection process. Right now, currently our bed and breakfasts do require to get like you say, a fire safety inspection every year from our fire department before renewal of their licenses. So that would be similar to the health and safety inspection that we are proposing for short-term rentals. As well, the regulations that Joanne's proposing, were developed to be fairly similar to what we currently have in our zoning bylaw for bed and breakfast. So, for example, the 4-bedroom maximum, the 8 patrons total maximum, as well as there were already existing requirements of our zoning bylaw for bed and breakfast. And then finally, there was already an additional parking requirement. There may be some more informational requirements, but those would be more so for new applicants. If you're a renewal, we'll be just continuing the same renewal process as if you're an existing short-term rental that you've been in the community for years. That makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. It's going to a new umbrella style. We don't want to make it too onerous on those that are already licensed. We already know that it's going to be an enforcement issue for the district, especially with our only having one bylaw officer, one part-time bylaw officer. It's going to put a little bit of stress on them. So excellent. Thank you.
Councilor Barco?
Put it on there. But one thing that caught my attention was, and I don't think it's going to be a very common situation, but if there was a house that was used for short-term rental and another house on the property that was used for long-term rental, and then that requires the involvement of a professional property management company, and is there some sort of certification or could you just somebody put down the brother-in-law's name and say he's my professional manager, or is there sort of a real way of establishing legitimacy for a management firm that's going to respond quickly?
Yeah, the way that it's written, it is for a professional management company. So those would be ones that essentially were established businesses that would be familiar with running short-term rentals, managing property, and they would be the ones that we'd be seeking. I follow up on that point if Tokyo has found any difficulties in terms of what people are putting down for management companies versus people that might not be qualified or committed to running and operating a short-term rental.
If I may, Your Worship, to add on to Joanne's question. So based on the advice of the council from previous meetings on this topic, I did have a conversation over the phone with the director of planning for the district of Tofino. And this was specifically a change they made after they actually implemented their zoning bylaw recommendations, because they were running into issues with regards to the operation of short rentals, that they said that they added this as a later zoning amendment to require it to be a professional property management company.
So on this side of the table? I have a few questions. The permanent resident on site doesn't have to be the owner, or it does have to be an owner. And could it be somebody that is renting long-term? Yes. Okay, good, thank you. Can you tell me what the current licensing amount is for bed and breakfast?
So I believe that it was recently released. I believe it was 175. Previous years, it was recently released at 125. For one breakfast, to the 3 bedrooms and then additional, per bedroom in addition to that.
So if they're all considered under the same umbrella as the term that, Councilor Patton used, then they would be paying $500 a month, a month, $500 a year for their license.
Yeah, you're correct, your worship. The proposed new license fee would be $500. However, for next year in 2022, since we've already issued the notices, there'll be a grandfather in the first year. Because we have not adopted these amendment bylaws yet, we've sent our notices out, so coming to effect in 2022.
Okay, thank you. I was wondering, I couldn't see anything in the, maybe I just haven't looked in the right spot, but I was wondering if you could give us examples of what the APC considers too limiting. Did they provide any examples of their concerns about being too limiting?
I think Joanna or I could either one.
Yes, so in general, the APC felt that the requirement for the resident on site, they had concerns with that, potentially limiting the amount of short-term rentals that would be eligible to be able to have the program. So it was concerned that proposed bylaws were to incorporate the existing operators into being able to participate in this program.
I think Joanna mentioned her in the presentation, there was a real mix of opinions that we see. And some of the feedback as well that we should be really opening up this up and let the market decide, especially to encourage new infill and new development from the downtown core, is that it actually uses a way that the district of Summerland can encourage more development in the downtown is to allowing and opening up short-term rentals to be so there was a couple people that were mentioning that idea, and for that reason, it was suggesting that perhaps it would be too restrictive as well, perhaps too restrictive on the type of zones, looking at just residential zones, perhaps like mixed-use zones such as in the downtown core, and other types of zones could be considered as well. There's some feedback, but everyone is mixed. Some disagree with that statement.
Okay, thank you. So, any more questions? Could someone bring forward the motion, please? Mr. Holmes? Yes, I do. Please.
The zoning bylaw amendment, 2021-048, 48 be read a first and second time, and a public hearing be held on January 24th, 2022 to receive public feedback on zoning bylaw amendment number 2021-048. And further that January 24th, 2021 public hearing, that should be 22, public hearing and regular evening council meeting be held at the Summerland Arena Banquet Room at 8820 Jubilee Road East, and that business license amendment bylaw 2021-049 be read a first and second time, that fees and charges amendment bylaw 2021-050 be read a first and second time, that bylaw notice enforcement amendment bylaw number 2021-051 051 be read a first and second time. That ticket information utilization amendment by law number 2021-052 be read a first and second.
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. Especially because it wasn't on the screen, I think it's important to read it out. And a seconder, Councillor Barker. Any further discussion on this? My only question or comment would be, the APC's recommendation to review this in 18 months. I don't know if you put a note on the file or whatever, however you do that. If there's no other deliberations, I will call the question. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. Okay, it is 8:56. Would anyone on council entertain an extension to the meeting? To ask this question. Councillor Holmes?
Until 9 o'clock. It's already 9 now?
Yes.
It's
It's 8:56.
Oh,
57.
9:30.
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. Are you seconding Councillor Van Alphen? Of course.
To deal with 9.3 and then table 9.4, Madam Mayor. Just because of time. Or if we get it all done in a half an hour, but I have my doubts.
Well, why don't we go to the 9:30 and we'll see where we're at, and then we can bring that forward again. Because there are a few other things on the agenda too. So you have seconded that, okay, all in favor? Okay. That's a good question. Does it have to be unanimous? I know we have to have a quorum, but does it have to be unanimous?
Sure.
It just says unless council resolves, so I don't think it needs to be in that unanimous.
Are the next items time sensitive?
In my opinion, no.
Can we grab them on Friday, or can they be postponed to the
Um,
next meeting?
Can we deal with them on Friday, Brad?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we're scheduled.
Okay, is council amenable? Oh, just sorry, Council Van Alphen.
There's a meeting scheduled at 2 o'clock for the Agriculture Advisory Committee.
And you're part of that, I would assume?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, so we're going to go till 9:30, and then we'll revisit this. I mean, that's what the vote showed. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so it's 9 o'clock now. We'll move on to 9.3 secondary dwelling regulation review. And this is for Brett.
Try to be quick. Next slide. Okay, back on, in regards to the Eastern zoning bylaw, as previously mentioned, actually, the district last made changes to our carriage house regulations in 2019. Currently, we allow carriage houses in urban and rural residential zones, but not in cultural zone areas. Right now, carriage houses are limited in our zoning bylaw to 9 meters square and maximum size. And again, council's already been aware, only limited to parcels greater than 1 hectare. However, we do allow secondary dwellings for additional dwellings for farm help on agricultural lands, but there's specific criteria that has to be met by the property before we would allow the issuance of initial. Finally, secondary suites are as well have a maximum size currently in our zoning about 90 meters squared and are allowed in the code. So in July of this year, the ALC came forward with a news release to bring residential flexibility to the ALC and basically to allow for additional residences with on agricultural parcels. And basically these changes come into effect on December 31st, 2021 this year. So previously to these changes, this slide shows the ALC only allowed a single one mobile home to be placed on agricultural lands. So maximum of 9 meters width. It could only be installed for immediate family purposes. So other purposes such as rental or farm health purposes had to go forward to the ALC for application and approval. But with the recent proposed amendments, following December 31st, the ALC will now allow the additional residence to be constructed on agricultural parcels within the ALR without an application to the ALC. And they have fairly clear regulations. Basically, if you're less than 48 hectares in parcel size, you're allowed 1 additional residence up to 90 meters squared. And for parcels that are larger than 40 hectares in size, you're allowed a larger additional residence of 106 meters squared. There is some conditions to those regulations. If there is already existing a principal residence larger than 500 meters squared on a parcel less than 40 hectares, then they are not permitted to have an additional residence, as well as if there's already an approved additional residence, they would be a third residence. So the new regulations allow flexibility by basically allowing the property owner to come forward with any type of proposed additional dwelling type that they want. It could be a garden suite, it could be a guest house. It's not. It could be in the form of a traditional carriage house with a Dutch ground floor, or even an accommodation unit within an agricultural use. As long as it's meeting that 90 meters squared size requirement. So that's much different than the previous regulations, which were restricted to mobile homes only and for family purposes only. So impact of the ALC's changes already since the news release in July, Development Services is seeing a number of inquiries recently of existing property owners in the district, as well as people looking to move into the community with their realtors, looking at agricultural parcels and asking if they could place a secondary dwelling on their agricultural properties. Right now, our zoning bylaw still restricts though additional dwelling, secondary dwellings on agricultural parcels to only additional dwellings for farm help. And the specific use regulations for an additional dwelling for farm help have a number of criteria. For example, it has to be for farm help only. And the parcel must have a minimum of 2 hectares of arable land, no more than 1 story in size, height, and no more than 3 bedrooms. The land has to be assessed as farmland, and as well, there must be a restricted covenant untitled or placed on title to restrict the dwelling to farm health purposes only. And most of these inquiries that we're receiving cannot meet all of these requirements. So with the fact that ALC is allowing it and as our zoning bylaws still being fairly restricted to farm health purposes, we do predict that there's going to be an increase in site-specific rezoning applications to allow for different forms of secondary dwellings on agricultural properties and or additional variances being requested by property owners. Additionally, in 2019, the building code was amended to remove the maximum size. The previously secondary suites were restricted in the code to 9 meters squared, as well as the code restricted suites to only be within single family dwellings. The code in 2019 was adjusted to allow secondary suites in other forms of housing like duplex and row housing, as well as removed the maximum size. And we've seen other local governments actually now since make changes to their bylaws to remove or increase the 90 meters squared requirement. Although currently our bylaw is limiting secondary suite sizes to only 90 meters squared. Our official community plan has some policy that gives us guidance. Section 7.4.3.1 accommodate a range of choice of housing types within the district to meet market demands. Staff see that allowing greater flexibility in the district zoning bylaw for secondary homes on agricultural lands and perhaps potentially larger secondary suites and carriage houses will provide more options to current landowners to respond to market pressures for additional housing supply. Additionally, section 7.4.3.2 ensure implementable options to accommodate more affordable forms of housing within the community, notably increasing density and reducing lot sizes while providing livable layout and design. Staff as well see potential changes to our zoning bylaws as one way we can add some gentle densification by allowing more permissive use of carriage houses and secondary suites within existing low density residential areas, and also the agricultural areas of the district as a form of gentle densification to meet our housing needs and goals. Hold on. This topic was presented to the Development Process Improvement Advisory Committee in October, and most of the discussion was of support from the Development Process Committee. This has been an area of concern of theirs since the committee was formed in early 2020. Some of the inconsistencies between the ALC's regulations and the district's regulations. So we're happy to see it brought forward. With regards to the Agriculture Advisory Committee, there was some concerns with regards to what the allowance of an additional dwelling may do to current regulations for the farm home plate. And maybe this may need to be reviewed as well, because we're going to be allowing the secondary residence perhaps on agricultural properties. There was some discussion on perhaps the farm home plate may not be the best tool, because there are certain areas of properties where it may be better suited for a secondary dwelling versus being in proximity to an existing home. Just want to point out one other thing here at the very bottom there. There was a request to investigate capacity for water, and there was some concern of allowing a secondary home on agricultural property, reducing the amount of water availability for irrigation purposes within some of the areas that are more outlying within the district that have perhaps less capacity for water. But in general, there was still support from the Agriculture Advisory Committee, and for that reason as well, staff are recommending that the district initiate a new planning review project to be initiated in early January, hopefully be finalized by May of 2022. Happy to get questions.
Council, who has questions? Okay, I have a few questions. Um, you talked about, the Agricultural Land Commission. Is the proposal though within the district, is it, not just ALR land, but, land that's zoned to agriculture?
Yeah, that's correct. So the intent of this project will be looking at secondary dwellings across all of our agricultural zones. So that would include land in the ALR and outside of the ALR, as well as our existing residential areas. For example, looking at the current secondary suite regulations as well.
Okay. I have to think about that one a little bit. And then my second question relates to the discussion we had earlier tonight. Would this still require 1+ hectare in size?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That's the questions I had. Councillor Nelson.
The first thing I have is a comment. I think the conversation with the Ag Advisory Committee had, and I wasn't there, but I've been to a few presentations by Dr. Nielsen. She retired from the research station, and it's not necessarily that individual farms may have a reduced irrigation availability. The concern is urbanization and development and the number of people who are currently moving, or the future potential of how many people are going to be living in the Okanagan and the impact that that is going to have on agricultural water and on agricultural water availability. It's not necessarily just individual plots. And so I think that we're talking a lot about our watershed and all the things that come along with it. And agricultural land is one thing, but agricultural water is another. And there's no reserve, there's no special plot, there's no way to ensure that that water will go to agriculture before it necessarily goes to watering a lawn or to flushing a toilet. And so that's, I think, a bigger concern than just simply, that's a little bit outside of the scope, but I think that's where they're coming from. My question is about all of the properties that currently have farm worker housing, which aren't actually used for farm workers. Are those somehow going to be inspected, legalized, validated? Are they counted? Will we know if someone comes in to apply for something? If they already have farm worker housing and it's just a single unit, will they be eligible to build another unit? We don't have an inventory of it, but are we going to create one?
Mayor, Council Carlson, for any existing secondary dwellings that are being used, that are in contravention with zoning bylaws, it's more of an enforcement. Right now, our zoning bylaws really restricted as to what we allow, when we allow additional dwellings, either for farm worker purposes in the form of a temporary farm worker established program or the official dwelling. That's it within the zoning bylaw. So if there are current that are being used, then yeah, it's more than enforcement. If there was an application brought forward for an additional residence on top of that dwelling, the way that we interpret the ALC is that they wouldn't be allowed to apply because they only allowed to have one dwelling, one additional dwelling on top of the principal residence, which we would confirm through zoning before we.
So if someone had, say they had trailer style buildings for an actual worker program, but they still only had one primary residence, that they should be allowed to keep that worker housing. Would they be then allowed to build a small thing that they could, couple family or to rent?
The question is potentially, to answer the question, sorry, through the every additional application that would not meet these rules can be applied to the ALC. So if they have an existing farm worker housing facility, for example, there could be a justification or rationale provided to the ALC that it should be still allowed to have additional.
Thank you. I think what it all leads to is that I see great potential to actually penalize the bona fide farmers that are using their worker housing and then want to have another accommodation, because all the people who don't have farm workers, which is a lot of small acreages in this town. Anyways, I see some great conversation to be had in the new year, I guess.
Councillor Holmes?
So it wasn't that long ago that we increased the size of carriage houses from 60 square meters to 90 square meters to bring it into line with other communities. And as soon as we do that, then, other communities, mostly rural areas, have now increased theirs to 125 square meters. And now we're looking to do, are we looking to do that as well in all zones? And I get, my question is, what is driving these ever increasing larger and larger and larger carriage houses?
Yeah, to the mayor, to Councillor Holmes, I think that there's first of all, there's probably two answers to that question. First of all, I do want to say that there's no guarantee in this review that we're actually going to increase the carriage house size. It's something that we can consider as part of the project. And right now, our specific use regulations for carriage houses have a number of criteria there, not just the maximum size, but also the number of bedrooms, how the carriage house is constructed, the maximum height as an example. So maybe those need to be reviewed as well to ensure perhaps better form and character within existing residential areas. So the point of the project is to maybe look at those a little more in detail. I think that there is market demand for that. That's where a lot of this comes from, for increasing that size. To be sure, for sure, it would be to add more density, perhaps to existing residential zoned areas that are low density before.
Any other questions? Councillor Renault?
Motion on the floor. Madam Mayor.
Sure, could I just ask one question? And I may have missed it in the report or in the presentation, but are we looking at raising again from 90 square meters?
It's something that could happen as part of this. I do want to preface that by saying that the ALC's rule for parcels less than 40 hectares in size is a maximum 90 meters squared. So that will be something that we'll have to evaluate. Currently, like I said, our carriage house regulations, we don't allow carriage houses within agricultural properties, but if we were to take the carriage house use and just apply to agricultural properties, it would closely match what the ALC is proposing. However, through the review, we may consider changes to that size, up or down, through this project.
Okay, and if it was up, for example, then they would have to apply to the ALC further?
That's correct, yeah, for anything above that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Van Offen, would you like to bring it to the table, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just one quick question to our planner. So 90 square, that's 1,000 square feet?
Yeah, roughly.
Thank you for the clarification. I'll put the motion on the floor, Madam Mayor. That council directs staff to initiate the new planning review project of the districts regulations for the following: 1 carriage house and secondary suites, and 2 secondary dwellings on agricultural land.
Thank you, Secretary. Councillor Holmes, further discussion? All in favor? And none opposed, so that carries unanimously. Okay, 9:20. Development Services Monthly Update, Brad?
Yeah, it's really quick again. So with regards to my monthly report, just everyone's seen these figures before, but just an update for the month of November. We're getting closer to the year end, so you can see what roughly our final totals will be, or close to the final totals. You see the variances are down, but total planning applications are up from 2020. So that from my perspective, I think that's a positive sign. This shows that the administrative changes we made to the zoning bylaw last fall are working, and we're getting less variances and more of the higher level type planning applications, such as subdivisions and rezonings, such as variances. Building permits, we're at 196 permits issued so far in 2021. That's getting up to our 5-year high. We are projecting that we might go or above that 5-year high by the end of the year. But we're going to do that yet. Of course, for December, I think construction value is at 58 million. Again, a record for the district. Bylaw enforcement, here are stats for the month of November for the last 2 years of this year for the bylaws that we have the files for. And total numbers year to date for bylaw enforcement. Again, traffic bylaw is high this year compared to previous years. The neighbor bylaws also continue to be complaints. So I need that, as well as any specific applications that are in that.
Thank you, Brad. You're really good at zipping through those slides. Council, any questions? All right, could I have someone bring forward that to receive that for information, please? Councillor Holmes and Carlson, all in favor? Great. On to information. Oh, I should ask, is there a notice of motion? Okay. On to information items. Is there any correspondence that Councilor would like to bring forward? Councilor Holmes.
Yeah, just the Silver Community Excellence Award, and then if we should put forward as something. I don't know what the definition of social responsibility, but if we follow that or no, but I was thinking of putting forward, we could have a discussion at some point about what we put forward, and I was thinking the excellent.
We can do that.
I think that we've got some great projects here in Summerland, not necessarily just in the last year, but maybe we've missed some opportunities. So I agree with Councilor. Okay, council reports. 6 minutes, 5 council reports. Council Barkley, nothing to report. Council Patton. Nope. Councilor Trainer said that she's very much enjoying the activities downtown as part of the Summerland Light Up.
That was going to be my report, so I guess I have nothing else to report.
Okay, that's a ditto for the Aaron squared. B3, okay, good. Councillor Van Alphen.
Oh, yeah, I got one.
Okay, that's great. And is there anybody wanting to say anything? We have, oh,
I'm not a counselor report, but I want to say something.
already.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to recognize in our last couple of minutes here, the tremendous work that our corporate officer did with IT to make this happen. Council probably isn't aware, but all these microphones and a bunch of the hardware, the camera, a lot of this they purchased, and there was some sort of Frankenstein type, duct tape and other things, but we're in really good shape now for meeting in this place. And it's thanks to the very hard work and ingenuity of our IT. That's Greg, that's Roland, that's Kendra, and thank you for that. And the other thing I wanted to say is for Friday, we're going to bring in some treats for council. It should be a short meeting on Friday, but we'll have some treats there early, 12:15 or so, some coffee, some desserts, some squares and other things, and council can have a little bit of Christmas before we get into the regular meeting. If you're available to come a bit early, and of course, welcome to have some of those treats even during the meeting as we cover those items. So just for council's awareness, we'll have that set out for 12:15.
Okay, and the meeting starts at 1 o'clock.
Starts at 1 o'clock.
Do you think that, I know that the adoption will go quickly, but do you think that the other item that we have, that we can get that done before the ALC meeting?
Oh, absolutely.
Or AAC meeting?
Absolutely. I
Okay,
would
good.
say so.
Good, okay, so I'll ask for someone to bring forward adjournment, Councillor Van Alphen and Councillor Carlson, all in favor? Great, thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, sir.